I will not sit quietly while the powerful orchestrate the destruction of LGBTQ children's lives. I will not water down the truth or sugarcoat the sinister reality we are facing. What is happening is not an accident. It is not a misunderstanding or a difference of opinion. It is a calculated, ruthless assault on the very existence of LGBTQ youth. The people in power, lawmakers, school boards, judges, and so-called leaders know exactly what they are doing. They are targeting children with precision, stripping away their rights, silencing their voices, and pushing them toward despair. And they do it without remorse. This is not about morality. It is not about religion. It is not about protecting children, as they so hypocritically claim. It is about control. It is about fear. It is about erasing anyone who does not conform to their narrow, suffocating vision of society. And in that mission, they have found LGBTQ children to be the perfect scapegoat. The powerful have always known that the easiest way to spread fear is to attack the most vulnerable. LGBTQ kids are easy targets. They are young, they are still discovering who they are, and they often lack the support systems they need to survive in a world that already marginalizes them. These kids are not political pawns. They are not ideological battlegrounds. They are children. But that hasn't stopped lawmakers from using them as cannon fodder in their relentless culture wars. Let me be clear, the anti-LGBTQ laws being passed are not random acts of bigotry. They are deliberate strategies designed to break these kids. Every "Don't Say Gay" bill, every ban on gender-affirming care, every restriction on books and educational materials that acknowledge LGBTQ identities, these are not isolated incidents. They are part of a coordinated effort to erase LGBTQ youth from public life, to make their very existence controversial, to push them back into the shadows where the powerful believe they belong. They want LGBTQ kids to be afraid. They want them to be invisible. They want them to suffer in silence until they either conform or disappear. And we know what happens when kids are forced into silence. We have the data. We have the stories. We have decades of evidence showing that LGBTQ youth who are denied acceptance and support face astronomical rates of depression, self-harm, homelessness, and suicide. We know that when kids are told, explicitly or implicitly, that they are a mistake, that who they are is shameful or wrong, they begin to believe it. And when that shame takes root, it becomes a poison that eats away at them until there is nothing left. So let's stop pretending that this is about policy differences or civil discourse. This is about life and death. This is about children being pushed to the brink because grown adults in positions of power have decided that their existence is too inconvenient, too complicated, too uncomfortable. We have heard the excuses. They say they are protecting children by banning books that talk about LGBTQ identities. Protecting children from what? From understanding that love exists in many forms? From learning that their own identities are valid? No, they're not protecting children. They're protecting bigotry. They say they are safeguarding fairness in sports by banning trans kids from competing. Fairness? There is nothing fair about isolating children, denying them community, and turning them into targets for harassment and violence. They say they are defending parental rights by restricting what teachers can say in classrooms. But whose parental rights? Not the rights of parents who love and affirm their LGBTQ kids. Not the rights of parents who want their children to grow up in inclusive, compassionate environments. No, the only parental rights they care about are the rights of parents who want to erase LGBTQ existence from public view. This is the game they play. Frame bigotry as protection, disguise hate as morality, and hope that we are too tired, too broken, or too afraid to fight back. But we are not tired. We are not broken. And we are done being afraid. This is a call to every parent, every teacher, every activist, every human being who still believes in decency and dignity. It is time to stop asking. It is time to start demanding. It is time to fight like the lives of these children depend on it, because they do. We need to be unapologetic. We need to be relentless. We need to make it impossible for lawmakers to pass these laws in silence, impossible for them to hide behind false pretenses. Every time they introduce an anti-LGBTQ bill, we need to flood their offices with calls, letters, and protests. We need to make their cruelty visible to the world. We need parents storming school boards, not just to demand inclusive curriculums, but to defend LGBTQ kids against the onslaught of hate disguised as policy. We need teachers who refuse to comply with censorship, who teach the truth, who make their classrooms safe spaces, who stand as shields for the students who have nowhere else to turn. We need lawsuits. We need activism. We need protests that block roads, fill courthouses, and make headlines. We need to force a reckoning. Because the truth is, the people in power will not change unless we make them. They will not wake up one morning and suddenly decide to stop attacking LGBTQ kids. They will stop when it becomes more painful for them to continue than it is for them to quit. That is where we come in. We must make it clear that for every law they pass, for every right they try to strip away, there will be consequences. There will be protests. There will be lawsuits. There will be outrage. We must drown out their lies with truth. We must drown out their hate with love, but not a quiet, passive love. A fierce, militant, unapologetic love that will not back down. We cannot afford to be polite. We cannot afford to soften our words or calm our anger. This is a fight for survival. And in fights for survival, mercy is a luxury we cannot afford. To the lawmakers passing these bills, to the governors signing them into law, to the school boards enforcing them, you will be remembered. History will record your names alongside those who enforced segregation, those who fought against women's suffrage, those who upheld slavery. You will not be remembered as defenders of morality or protectors of children. You will be remembered as the villains you are. And to every parent of an LGBTQ child, your voice is powerful. Your love is revolutionary. You have a responsibility to fight, not just for your child, but for every child. Because this is not just about individual families. This is about the kind of world we are creating. And right now, that world is not safe for LGBTQ kids. But it can be, if we fight hard enough. If we refuse to back down, if we refuse to let these children be erased, we owe them that. We owe them everything. I will not watch another generation grow up believing that their existence is a crime. I will not let the powerful destroy these kids without a fight. This is the line in the sand. They will not erase us. They will not erase our children. We are done asking. We are done waiting. We are done being polite. Now we fight. I refuse to sit quietly while LGBTQ children are being crushed under the weight of laws designed to erase them. I refuse to stand idly by while governments, schools, and so-called leaders use their power not to protect children, but to target them. This is not a political issue. This is not a debate. This is about survival. It's about children being stripped of their right to exist openly, freely, and safely. It's about the brutal reality that for many LGBTQ kids, the most dangerous part of their lives isn't the schoolyard bully. It's the system that was supposed to protect them. Every time a government passes a law that bans LGBTQ discussions in classrooms, outlaws gender-affirming care, or criminalizes same-sex relationships, it sends a crystal-clear message. You don't belong here. You don't deserve safety. You don't deserve happiness. These policies don't just silence kids. They rip away the very foundation of their identity. They turn their homes, schools, and communities into minefields where every conversation could be a threat, every authority figure a potential enemy. Imagine being a child, already navigating the chaos of growing up, and on top of that, you're forced to carry the unbearable weight of knowing that your government, the highest authority in your life, wants you gone. It tells you that who you are is so offensive, so dangerous, that it must be hidden, legislated against, and erased. This is not abstract harm. This is trauma that embeds itself into the bones of a child, warping their sense of self, leaving scars that will last a lifetime. We have seen this before. History is a graveyard filled with the lives lost to state-sponsored hatred. We know the stories of queer people imprisoned, brutalized, erased, and killed. We know the statistics about LGBTQ youth who face staggering rates of homelessness, suicide, and mental health crises. We know how easy it is for a society to tip from quiet intolerance into open violence. And yet here we are, watching it happen again. I am done asking politely. I am done waiting for those in power to suddenly grow a conscience. If they cared, they would have acted already. The truth is, they don't see these kids as worth saving. They see them as bargaining chips, cultural scapegoats, distractions from their own corruption and failures. They're willing to sacrifice children, actual children, to score political points with their base. That is the reality. That is the level of rot we are up against. So I'm speaking directly to the LGBTQ community, to every parent, every teacher, every human being who still has a shred of empathy left. We have to fight. We have to make it impossible for these politicians to sleep at night. We have to make our outrage inescapable. We have to be louder than their lies, more relentless than their cruelty. Parents, your child could be next. Even if your kid isn't LGBTQ, even if you think this fight doesn't touch your family, understand this. Any system willing to target one group of children will not hesitate to turn on another. Once hate takes root in laws, it spreads like wildfire. Today, it's LGBTQ kids. Tomorrow, it could be yours. To the LGBTQ community, I say this: we have survived worse. We have faced witch hunts, purges, conversion therapy, police raids, and state-sanctioned murder. And still, we are here. But survival is not enough. It's time to stop merely existing and start fighting like our lives depend on it, because they do. We cannot afford to be patient. We cannot afford to wait for the next election cycle, the next policy review, the next watered-down reform. Kids are suffering now. Kids are dying now. We need direct action. We need mass protests that shut down streets and force cameras to turn toward us. We need parents storming school boards, demanding inclusive curriculums and protections for LGBTQ students. We need lawsuits that drag these hateful laws into courtrooms and expose their cruelty for all to see. We need teachers who refuse to comply with censorship, who smuggle the truth into their classrooms, who protect their LGBTQ students like their lives depend on it, because they do. And we need to stop being polite about it. I don't care if it makes people uncomfortable. I don't care if it disrupts brunch or inconveniences someone's commute. There are children who go to bed every night terrified of being outed to their parents. There are kids who self-harm because they have been taught to hate who they are. There are kids who have already decided that they will not live to see adulthood because they've been given every reason to believe that the world has no place for them. If that doesn't warrant disruption, what does? This is not about left or right. This is about life or death. Every single time a government passes a law against LGBTQ people, they are writing the obituary of a child who will not survive the shame, the isolation, the constant message that they are a mistake. This is not hypothetical. The data is clear. LGBTQ youth are 4 times more likely to attempt suicide than their peers. And those numbers skyrocket in communities where anti-LGBTQ rhetoric is rampant and protections are stripped away. I am tired of hearing, "It's just politics." No, this is blood on their hands. I am tired of hearing, "Well, at least they're not banning everything." As if partial oppression is something we're supposed to thank them for. I am tired of hearing, "We just need to wait for the next election." Kids don't have time to wait. We need urgency. We need anger. We need a refusal to normalize this level of cruelty. Because when we normalize it, when we downplay it, when we try to make it palatable, We are signing the death warrant of another child. And I refuse to be complicit in that. To those in power, your legacy will be written in the lives you destroyed. You will be remembered not as leaders, but as cowards who built their careers on the backs of children. And no amount of wealth, power, or political spin will wash the blood from your hands. To every parent of an LGBTQ child, your voice is powerful. Use it. Demand that your schools are safe spaces. Demand that your lawmakers pass protections, not persecution. Be louder than the bigots, because right now, the bigots are winning. To every LGBTQ kid who feels scared, who feels invisible, who feels like the world has turned its back on them, you are not broken. You are not alone. And there are people who will fight for you with everything they have. We see you. We believe in you. And we will not stop until you are free to live fully, proudly, and safely. This is our fight. And we're done asking. We're done waiting. We are done hoping that power will correct itself. History is watching us. Our children are watching us. And the only acceptable outcome is victory. Because I refuse to live in a world where hatred wins. And I refuse to let another generation grow up believing that who they are is a crime. The time is now. Get loud. Get angry. Get in the way. Fight like lives depend on it, because they do. We refuse to be erased, exposing the agenda to break LGBTQ youth and the urgent fight for our future. The attack on LGBTQ rights isn't just a policy debate or a tug-of-war between social ideologies. It's a full-scale assault on the very essence of LGBTQ youth. This is not about protecting children, as the architects of oppression so loudly proclaim. It's about control. It's about manipulation. It's about shaping the future in a way that guarantees LGBTQ people remain sidelined, silent, broken, and stripped of the power they rightfully deserve. Let's be brutally honest. They aren't terrified of LGBTQ kids existing. They're terrified of LGBTQ kids thriving. They're terrified of them growing up into leaders, innovators, and decision-makers who can disrupt the status quo. They fear a future where queer people aren't just footnotes in history books, but authors of them, writing laws, running companies, leading nations. And so, they act early. They aim for the root. They target the youth. Because if you can break a child, you can control the adult they become. The strategy is as old as oppression itself. Weaponize shame, breed self-doubt, and choke ambition at its inception. They know that if LGBTQ kids grow up internalizing the belief that they are defective or dangerous, they will never dare to step into positions of power. They will shrink themselves, limit their dreams, and avoid spaces where true change happens. This isn't speculative. It's calculated. Look at the legislation. Look at the book bans. Look at the censorship in classrooms. Look at the obsessive policing of identities. Laws that claim to protect children from LGBTQ content aren't about safety. They're about silence. They're about invisibility. Because when children don't see themselves reflected in leadership, in history, in science, in art, they begin to believe they don't belong there. They are manufacturing shame. When lawmakers strip LGBTQ content from schools and libraries, they're not shielding kids, they're building walls around them. They are intentionally cutting queer youth off from their history, from their heroes, from proof that they are not alone. And when you strip away history, when you erase the existence of LGBTQ leaders, innovators, and revolutionaries, you control what's possible in a child's imagination. This is not accidental. This is not about values. This is strategic, generational sabotage. And here's the most sinister part. They've mastered the art of cloaking their bigotry in the language of care. We're protecting children, they say, as they pass laws that make it impossible for LGBTQ youth to exist safely in their own schools. We're safeguarding families, they insist, as they rip away healthcare, legal protections, and basic human rights. It's a grotesque manipulation. One designed to paint the oppressors as saviors while the real victims are gaslit into silence. But we see through it, because here's what they really want. A future where LGBTQ people remain peripheral, decorators of society, but never architects of it. The stereotype of the creative queer isn't just a casual trope. It's a cage. It subtly suggests that LGBTQ people are perfect for roles that add color to society, artists, dancers, stylists, but ill-suited for leadership, for governance, for positions of real influence. It's another form of erasure, wrapped in what sounds like a compliment. Because if we're busy decorating the world, we're not leading it. But this ends now. The manipulation has gone on long enough. The cruelty of these policies isn't collateral damage, it's the point. When they criminalize trans healthcare, when they censor inclusive education, when they strip LGBTQ youth of affirming spaces, they know exactly what they're doing. They're traumatizing children into submission. They are engineering a generation too broken to rise. And the consequences are devastating. LGBTQ youth already face disproportionately high rates of depression, anxiety, and suicide, not because of who they are, but because of a world engineered to break them. When lawmakers pass bills that force teachers to remain silent about LGBTQ identities, when school boards pull queer literature off shelves, they're not neutral. They're accomplices in that harm. They are manufacturing isolation. They are breeding shame. And shame is the most powerful tool of control, because a child who feels ashamed of who they are will never fight back. They will not run for office. They will not lead movements. They will not sit at the decision-making tables that shape our future. And that is exactly what those in power want. But we refuse to let them win. To the LGBTQ community, it's time to stop waiting for permission. Stop accepting scraps of representation while real power remains locked away. We don't need token roles. We need influence. We need queer politicians, trans scientists, non-binary CEOs, lesbian judges, bisexual generals, and gay presidents. We need to take over the spaces they've told us aren't for us, and we need to do it without apology. This is not the time for polite advocacy. It's the time for disruption. If you've ever believed that leadership wasn't for you, unlearn that lie. If you've ever shrunk your ambition because you thought the boardroom, the laboratory, or the government wasn't a place for people like you, destroy that belief now. We need you leading. We need you building. We need you fighting. And to the parents of LGBTQ kids, your silence is not neutral. It's compliance. Loving your child privately means nothing if you don't fight for them publicly. It means nothing if you stay quiet while lawmakers erase their existence from classrooms and public spaces. You say you want your children to succeed, to thrive, but that will never happen in a world designed to break them. You must fight harder than those working to silence them. Go to school board meetings. Fight against book bans. Demand inclusive education. Push back against anti-LGBTQ legislation. Surround your child with role models who reflect who they are and who they can become: leaders, pioneers, revolutionaries. Let them see that their future is limitless. Because here's the truth that terrifies those in power. Empowered LGBTQ kids grow into unstoppable adults. Adults who lead revolutions. Adults who rewrite laws. Adults who take over industries. Adults who challenge and change the system that was built to exclude them. And that is exactly why they're trying to break them now, before they can ever rise. But it's too late. We see the pattern. We see the manipulation. We see the cruelty hiding behind false narratives of protection. And we will not be silent. This is a call to arms. No mercy, no compromise. We must organize, educate, and infiltrate the very systems designed to keep us out. We need LGBTQ youth to know they are worthy not just of existing, but of leading. We need parents to stand up, not just for their own kids, but for every child forced into silence. We need allies to stop clapping politely from the sidelines and step into the fight. We are done begging for acceptance. We demand power. Because if we don't fight for this generation of LGBTQ youth, who will? If we don't stop the systemic erasure now, we risk losing another generation, another wave of brilliant minds, strong leaders, and transformative voices silenced before they ever had a chance to speak. We will not let that happen. We refuse to lose. We refuse to let them win. The time for waiting is over. The time for leading is now. Fight like every child's future depends on it, because it does. They aren't protecting children. They're hunting them. Every law they pass, every book they ban, every speech about family values and safety is a weapon designed to cut deep into the lives of LGBTQ kids. These aren't isolated policies or cultural misunderstandings. This is a war on truth, on identity, on freedom. And the front lines? The minds and hearts of LGBTQ youth. Let's stop pretending this is about bathroom bills or sports teams. Let's stop buying into the sanitized language of concerned parents or protecting childhood innocence. Because the people behind these attacks aren't confused. They aren't worried about fairness or safety. They're terrified of what happens when LGBTQ kids grow up unbroken, empowered, and ready to lead. They don't fear queer kids, they fear queer adults. Adults who vote. Adults who run for office. Adults who reshape culture, economy, law, and power. And so, they aim where it hurts the most, at the root. If they can traumatize LGBTQ children early, if they can embed shame deep into their identities, then they don't have to fight them later. That's the game. Make them feel like outcasts. Fill their formative years with isolation, fear, and doubt. A child who thinks they're broken won't grow up to challenge systems. They'll grow up just trying to survive. This isn't speculation, it's strategy. The lawmakers who strip away healthcare for trans youth, the school boards that ban LGBTQ books, the influencers who spew anti-queer rhetoric to millions, they all know the power of trauma. They know that if a kid grows up internalizing that who they are is dangerous or shameful, they're less likely to fight back. They're more likely to hide, to self-silence, to shrink themselves to fit into the suffocating boxes society has built. And it's working. Queer kids are dying because of it. Suicide rates among LGBTQ youth are astronomical, not because of who they are, but because of what the world does to them. Every time a law is passed that erases their existence, every time a school refuses to acknowledge their identity, every time a parent disowns their child for being trans or gay or non-binary, it drives that trauma deeper. But here's what those in power didn't calculate. We see through the lies now. We see that every family values speech is a mask for bigotry. We see that every Protect the Children bill is a blueprint for erasure. And we're done playing nice. Because this isn't just about survival anymore, it's about taking power. It's about making sure LGBTQ kids don't just make it through the system but grow up ready to burn it down and build something better. We need to fight with everything we have. No more waiting for politicians to save us. No more being satisfied with scraps of representation. No more pretending that acceptance is enough. We need influence. We need power. And we need to start where they're hitting the hardest, the youth. If you're LGBTQ and reading this, understand this. You are not broken. The shame they tried to bury in you was a weapon. The isolation you felt wasn't a flaw, it was engineered. And if you made it through that, even half alive, you're already more powerful than they ever wanted you to be. Now, imagine what would happen if every LGBTQ kid growing up right now never had to recover from that trauma in the first place. Imagine a generation that didn't have to heal from their childhoods before they could lead. That's what they fear. That's why they're escalating. Because they know that empowered LGBTQ youth don't just survive, they dismantle systems. So here's the call: fight harder. Show up at the school board meetings. Challenge every law. Don't just vote. run for office. Start local, build momentum. Fill school boards, city councils, legislatures with people who refuse to compromise on human rights. Don't let them pass these bills quietly. Make it loud. Make it messy. Use your voice. Make art that destabilizes. Write stories that heal. Create media that doesn't just include LGBTQ people as side characters, but centers them as leaders, revolutionaries, visionaries. Flood the culture with narratives that make it impossible to erase queer existence. And parents, if you're raising an LGBTQ kid, this is not the time to sit on the sidelines. Love in private isn't enough. It's public love that saves lives. Fight like hell for your child, not just in your home, but out in the world. Stand up in schools, in legislatures, on the streets. Be louder than the hate. And allies? If you're not in this fight like your own life depends on it, you're not an ally, you're a spectator. The trauma they're using against LGBTQ kids today? It's a tool that will be used against others tomorrow. The same systems that crush queer kids today will come for someone else tomorrow. Don't wait until it's personal. This is the moment. No more politeness. No more asking nicely. No more trying to win people over with palatable narratives. The people attacking LGBTQ youth aren't interested in dialogue. They're interested in erasure. So stop debating them and start defeating them. Organize. Vote. Protest. Disrupt. Build networks of care that bypass the systems trying to destroy us. Protect queer kids like their lives depend on it, because they do. They thought they could traumatize us into silence. They thought shame would keep us small. But here we are. Louder, angrier, stronger, and we're done playing by their rules. It's time to fight like future generations depend on it, because they do. We refuse to be erased, exposing the agenda to break LGBTQ youth and the urgent fight for our future. The attack on LGBTQ rights isn't just a policy debate or a tug-of-war between social ideologies. It's a full-scale assault on the very essence of LGBTQ youth. This is not about protecting children, as the architects of oppression so loudly proclaim. It's about control. It's about manipulation. It's about shaping the future in a way that guarantees LGBTQ people remain sidelined, silent, broken, and stripped of the power they rightfully deserve. Let's be brutally honest. They aren't terrified of LGBTQ kids existing. They're terrified of LGBTQ kids thriving. They're terrified of them growing up into leaders, innovators, and decision-makers who can disrupt the status quo. They fear a future where queer people aren't just footnotes in history books, but authors of them, writing laws, running companies, leading nations. And so, they act early. They aim for the root. They target the youth. Because if you can break a child, you can control the adult they become. The strategy is as old as oppression itself. Weaponize shame, breed self-doubt, and choke ambition at its inception. They know that if LGBTQ kids grow up internalizing the belief that they are defective or dangerous, they will never dare to step into positions of power. They will shrink themselves, limit their dreams, and avoid spaces where true change happens. This isn't speculative. It's calculated. Look at the legislation. Look at the book bans. Look at the censorship in classrooms. Look at the obsessive policing of identities. Laws that claim to protect children from LGBTQ content aren't about safety. They're about silence. They're about invisibility. Because when children don't see themselves reflected in leadership, in history, in science, in art, they begin to believe they don't belong there. They are manufacturing shame. When lawmakers strip LGBTQ content from schools and libraries, they're not shielding kids, they're building walls around them. They are intentionally cutting queer youth off from their history, from their heroes, from proof that they are not alone. And when you strip away history, when you erase the existence of LGBTQ leaders, innovators, and revolutionaries, you control what's possible in a child's imagination. This is not accidental. This is not about values. This is strategic, generational sabotage. And here's the most sinister part. They've mastered the art of cloaking their bigotry in the language of care. We're protecting children, they say, as they pass laws that make it impossible for LGBTQ youth to exist safely in their own schools. We're safeguarding families, they insist, as they rip away healthcare, legal protections, and basic human rights. It's a grotesque manipulation, one designed to paint the oppressors as saviors while the real victims are gaslit into silence. But we see through it, because here's what they really want. A future where LGBTQ people remain peripheral, decorators of society, but never architects of it. The stereotype of the creative queer isn't just a casual trope. It's a cage. It subtly suggests that LGBTQ people are perfect for roles that add color to society, artists, dancers, stylists, but ill-suited for leadership, for governance, for positions of real influence. It's another form of erasure, wrapped in what sounds like a compliment. Because if we're busy decorating the world, we're not leading it. But this ends now. The manipulation has gone on long enough. The cruelty of these policies isn't collateral damage, it's the point. When they criminalize trans healthcare, when they censor inclusive education, when they strip LGBTQ youth of affirming spaces, they know exactly what they're doing. They're traumatizing children into submission. They are engineering a generation too broken to rise. And the consequences are devastating. LGBTQ youth already face disproportionately high rates of depression, anxiety, and suicide, not because of who they are, but because of a world engineered to break them. When lawmakers pass bills that force teachers to remain silent about LGBTQ identities, when school boards pull queer literature off shelves, they're not neutral. They're accomplices in that harm. They are manufacturing isolation. They are breeding shame. And shame is the most powerful tool of control. Because a child who feels ashamed of who they are will never fight back. They will not run for office. They will not lead movements. They will not sit at the decision-making tables that shape our future. And that is exactly what those in power want. But we refuse to let them win. To the LGBTQ community, it's time to stop waiting for permission. Stop accepting scraps of representation while real power remains locked away. If you're the parent of a transgender child, you already know that loving your kid sometimes means standing in front of them, shielding them from a world that's determined to tear them down. But love isn't always soft. Sometimes love is fierce. Sometimes it's loud. And right now, it needs to be relentless. Because what's happening to transgender children isn't random. It's not a misunderstanding or a debate about policy. It's a calculated, strategic attack designed to erase them. And the people in power, the lawmakers, school boards, religious leaders, media figures, know exactly what they're doing. They want your child to feel isolated. They want them to feel unsafe. They want them to question their worth. Because a child who grows up doubting themselves is a child who won't grow into a leader. And that's the ultimate goal, to break them before they can rise. They don't say it out loud, of course. They mask their cruelty in the language of protection. They hide behind claims of preserving family values or safeguarding children. But look closer, and the rot is obvious. When they pass laws banning gender-affirming healthcare, when they force teachers to misgender students or remove LGBTQ books from libraries, they aren't protecting anyone. They're controlling the narrative. They're cutting off transgender kids from the resources, role models, and community that could empower them. The truth is, this isn't about sports teams or bathrooms or pronouns. It's about power. It's about a system terrified of change. A system that thrives when people conform, obey, and stay in their place. Transgender kids, by their very existence, challenge that system. They challenge rigid ideas about gender, about identity, about what's normal. And that terrifies those in power. So they respond with control. They legislate identities. They criminalize healthcare. They weaponize schools. And in the process, they put a target on your child's back. And where are the so-called protectors now? Where are the community leaders, the politicians who swear they care about kids? Too many of them are the ones holding the knives. And when parents of transgender kids speak out, they're often met with silence, or worse, outright hostility. Suddenly, it's not just your child under attack. It's you. Your parenting is questioned. Your values are smeared. Your family is treated like a threat. It's exhausting. It's isolating. And that's by design. Because if they can make you feel alone, they can make you stop fighting. If they can turn your neighbors, your school board, even your extended family against you, they think you'll retreat. They think you'll back down. But you can't. You can't afford to. Because the people attacking trans kids aren't going to stop. They've found a new target, and they're not letting go. To them, your child is political capital. Their identity is a wedge issue. Their existence is a tool to rally voters, fundraise, and score points in a never-ending culture war. They don't care about the suicide rates. They don't care about the bullying. They don't care about the fear your child carries walking into school every day. They care about power, and they're willing to sacrifice your child to keep it. But here's what they didn't count on you. They didn't count on the parents who refuse to stay silent. The parents who show up at school board meetings, who march, who call out the lies, who don't care about being polite because their kid's life is on the line. That's what terrifies them, because they can ignore the activists. They can tune out the media. But parents? Parents fighting for their children? That's unstoppable. And you're not alone. There are thousands of other parents who are fighting the same fight, carrying the same exhaustion, feeling the same rage. Find them. Link arms with them. Because together, you're stronger than any school board, any lawmaker, any system of control. The hardest part? Sometimes you'll be fighting your own community. The people you thought you could trust, neighbors, friends, even family, will turn away. They'll parrot the talking points about biological sex and protecting girls in sports. They'll act like this is about fairness when it's about erasure. And you'll have to make a choice. Stay quiet to keep the peace or fight like hell for your kid. Choose your kid. Every time. Because the people who attack trans kids don't stop at the kids. They go after the families. They go after the support systems. They want to make it so painful to stand up that no one dares to. That's the game. And the only way to win is not to back down. Show up, even when it's terrifying. Speak out, even when your voice shakes. Call out the lies, even when you're outnumbered. Vote like your kid's life depends on it, because it does. Every law passed that restricts healthcare, every book pulled from a shelf, every bathroom ban, every attack on education, these are not isolated events. They're part of a larger machine designed to erase transgender people from public life. And your child feels every bit of it. They feel it when their school won't call them by their name. They feel it when they see politicians debating whether they deserve healthcare. They feel it when people stare at them in public bathrooms, when adults whisper about them, when classmates repeat the hateful things they hear at home. But they also feel it when you fight for them. They feel it when you speak up, when you challenge the school, when you show them that their existence isn't something to be hidden, it's something to be defended loudly and without apology. And that kind of love, that kind of fierce, unapologetic, public love, it's the most powerful thing in the world. It's the one thing those in power can't control. They can ban books. They can pass cruel laws. They can spread misinformation. But they can't stop a parent who refuses to let their kid be erased. So be that parent. Be louder than their hate. Be braver than their fear. And never, ever stop fighting. Because your child is watching. And they need to see that when the world tried to erase them, their parents stood tall, unflinching, and refused to let it happen. They need to see that love isn't passive. Love is a battle cry. And this is your fight. Now go in it.